The year is 196 BC. A trumpeter silences the crowd at the Isthmian Games. A herald steps into the center of the track at the stadium. The Senate of Rome and Titus Quintius Flamininus the proconsul, he declares, leave the Greek cities free. The crowd explodes with unrestrained joy. They rush toward Flamininus to touch their liberator, to shower him with praise. The Greek cities had united with Flamininus to defeat Philip V of Macedon. They had worked as a unit, and they had won. Now, they were finally free. This scene is what 19th century Greek readers of Polybius, a Greek writer of the 2nd century BC, would have read about when they opened the ancient historians' histories. They would have noticed how, in Polybius' descriptions of the conference at Nicaea and the Isthmian Games just described, the people of Athens, Sparta, Aetolia, and Achaea are referred to as part of Greece. They are Greeks, a people united culturally in defense of their homeland. They would have also read Plutarch, an ancient Greek historian of the 1st century AD, who in his description of the Isthmian Games speaks of Flamininus as the champion of a unified Greece. After the independence movement that started in 1821, modern Greeks attempted to establish continuity with their nation-state and their classical Greek past. The words used by Polybius and Plutarch substantiate this notion of continuity. Nonetheless, this period of Greek history, this break in the era of supposed Greek enslavement from the time of Alexander until 1821, was completely overlooked by modern Greeks of the early 19th century. Why? Was it because the Greeks were not actually free? Or because Flamininus, who was Roman, united the Greek cities instead of a true Greek? Join me as I explore these questions, as I look back at this critical era of Greek history and how Greeks of the early 19th century perceived it.
While most people are familiar with the Roman Empire from countless books, television shows, and films, few have explored how the Roman Republic came to dominate Greece in the 2nd century BC.
Almost 150 years after the death of Alexander in 323, Macedon was not the superpower it once was. Philip's imperialist ambitions ultimately led to the First Macedonian War with the Roman Republic, an indecisive conflict that would forever tie Rome to the complex political developments on the Balkan Peninsula. The showdown between the Republic and Macedon was far from over. In 200 BC, Greeks who feared Philip V's imperialist ambitions petitioned the Roman Senate to help them curb Macedonian encroachment on their territory. The Senate duly asked the Roman people for war, who ratified their proposal and dispatched an army to Greece. The fate of the Greek cities would be determined by the second bloody clash between the Mediterranean's foremost superpowers, the Second Macedonian War. In 198 BC, the upstart politician Titus Quintius Flamininus was elected consul, the premier office of the Roman Republic. Polybius likened Roman consuls to monarchs. They held absolute power in the field. Flamininus' first duty, then, was to successfully end the Second Macedonian War. When he arrived in Greece, Flamininus immediately embarked on a 2-year offensive to liberate the Greek cities from Macedonian rule.
Flamininus worked to unite almost all of the Greek states to defeat Philip. By 197, he had secured the support of this city, Athens, as well as Sparta, Aetolia, Achaea, Messene, Elis, and Boeotia.
Almost all of Greece, up to Thessaly, was either neutral or bent on the destruction of Philip. This would become especially evident at the conference at Nicaea, called by Philip, who knew it would be his last chance to secure peace on halfway favorable terms. The conference presents us with our first instance of Greek unity described by the ancient writers. At the conference conferred by Philip, Polybius tells us that the Greek representatives demanded Philip withdraw his forces from the whole of Greece, or Elados. This demand is critical because Polybius says all of the Greek representatives at Nicaea made this bold claim. Despite their considerable political differences, and whatever disputes they may have had in the past, the Greek representatives believed in an independent Greece, a Greece free from the fetters imposed by Macedon. Polybius implies that the representatives at the conference at Nicaea were acutely aware of their Greek identity. For him, they understood themselves all to be Greek, unified in their opposition to the imperialist ambitions of Philip. The Greeks who helped create the national narrative could then look to Polybius and believe that a Greek ethnos was united to defeat Philip in the 2nd century. This, of course, would substantiate nationalistic claims prominent after the independence movement that established continuity between the modern Greek nation and the classical Greek past. This time period was not, however, cited in the earliest versions of the national narrative. Why? We will return to this question shortly, after we examine our second instance of Greek unity in the form of the Isthmian Declaration. The conference at Nicaea was not as fruitful as Philip had hoped. He rejected the severe ultimatum of Flamininus and the Greek allies, and was forced to continue the war. At Kynoskephali, in 197, he was decisively defeated by Flamininus and his Aetolian allies. The war was finally over. It so happened that the time of the Isthmian Games coincided with Philip's defeat at Kynoskephali.
The Isthmian Games were one of 4 Pan-Hellenic games held throughout antiquity for centuries. Like those celebrated at Delphi, Nemea, and famed Olympia, the Isthmian Games, held here at Isthmia near Corinth, were a kind of sports festival, an opportunity for the finest athletes of the Greek city-states to showcase their tremendous physical capability for rewards and endless fame.
Polybius tells us that the expectation of what would happen at the games attracted men of the highest rank from almost every quarter of the civilized world. No one quite knew, save for Flamininus himself, what would happen now that the Macedonians had been driven from all of Greece.
In the midst of this atmosphere of uncertainty, Polybius tells us, a trumpeter called for silence, and a herald came forward to deliver a proclamation, here in this athletic stadium constructed during the 3rd century BC. The Senate of Rome and Titus Quinctius Flamininus, the herald declared, having defeated King Philip and the Macedonians in battle, leave the Greek cities free, without garrisons, subject to no tribute, and in full enjoyment of their ancestral laws.
The crowds went wild. Polybius claims the ecstatic Greeks nearly killed Flamininus as they rushed toward him with unrestrained joy. Plutarch tells us that the volume and power of the human voice after the proclamation was so formidable that it caused ravens overhead to literally fall from the sky. While these descriptions certainly seem embellished, these writers are keen to stress the importance of this event. Greece, which had united to defeat Philip, was finally free.
The Isthmian Games present us with our second instance of Greek unity described by the ancient writers. In his description of the events at Isthmia, Polybius uses phrases like the freedom of Greece and all of the Greeks became free. Plutarch speaks of Flamininus as the savior and champion of Greece and tells us that after the proclamation, many were moved to reason and discourse about Greece.
Notice how Polybius and Plutarch consistently use the term Greece. They speak of what seems like a unified entity. Why then did Greeks of the early 19th century leave this period of unity of freedom out of the national narrative when they wanted to establish modern continuity with the classical Greek past? How did they interpret the words of Plutarch and Polybius? In order to answer these questions, we must first understand how early Greek nationalists understood their national narrative in the first place. After the War of Independence, most Greeks understood the history of the apparent Greek nation as a tripartite scheme. Hellenic history was divided into its ancient, medieval, and modern parts. The classical Greeks were once free cultivators of civilization, but were defeated at the Battle of Chaeronea by Philip II of Macedon in 338 BC. That battle marked the onset of Greece's enslavement until the nation's resurrection in 1821. Byzantium, at this point, was still more or less excluded from the national narrative. For most Greeks of the early 19th century, the Greek states who united to defeat Philip V of Macedon were still enslaved.
Why then do they say that they were enslaved? Polybius and Plutarch both make a point to say that the Greeks united to defeat Philip. After 150 years of Macedonian rule, they were finally free. Do Polybius and Plutarch perhaps embellish Flamininus' liberation rhetoric?
Perhaps the Greeks were in fact united, but not necessarily free. 19th century Greeks may have interpreted the situation in this way. While Flamininus claimed to have freed the Greeks from the Macedonians, the Greeks were only really free to serve Roman interests. Even if there was little to no Roman military presence in Greece, ambassadors from the various Greek states consulted the Senate before every major decision. The Romans continued to occupy the citadel of Acrocorinth for a brief period, and no city or coalition was permitted by the Romans to be more powerful than any other. Rome, in effect, exercised an informal protectorate over the whole of Greece. Greece, the Roman protectorate, is certainly nowhere near as laudable as, say, the union of independent Greek city-states to halt the Persian invasion. There may be another critical reason that Greeks of the early 19th century chose to exclude a unified, free Greece of the early 2nd century BC from the national narrative. While Titus Quintius Flamininus did in fact work to unite almost every Greek state to defeat Philip V of Macedon, he was not a Greek. A critical component of early Greek nationalism was not only the continuity established between the modern state and the classical Greek past, but the blood relationship between modern Greeks and their ancestors. The wealthy merchants and educated academics at the forefront of the independence movement came to believe that the Greek people truly were the descendants of renowned ancients like Socrates, Pericles, and Plato. Men like Themistocles, then, were revered, not only because of their contributions to Greece, but because they were related to modern Greeks. As a Roman, Flamininus was in no way an ancestor of early Greek nationalists. Despite whatever he may have done to unify Greece, he was an outsider, a barbarian in the strict sense of the word. Early Greek nationalists seem not to have considered a unified Greece worthy of praise if a Roman commander was the one to unify it. The Roman sack of Corinth in 146 BC ended Greece's short-lived period of political freedom. The Roman Republic annexed all of Greece shortly thereafter. Early Greek nationalists seem to have made a conscious effort to exclude the Greece united by Flamininus from their early national narrative, despite what Polybius and Plutarch say about a free, unified Greece in their description of the events at Nicaea and Isthmian. Here we have selective memory at play. Even if united, Roman Greece was not an attractive polity to early Greek nationalists. As such, it was stripped from the national consciousness. One must consider the serious issues with this kind of selective memory. In the minds of early Greek nationalists, the Greece Flamininus knew, if unified, was not free. It was forgotten, left to be discussed by scholars and students.